I suddenly found myself floating in this luminous, empty, but full space. And I felt as though I was literally one with the infinite, one with the cosmos. And so that experience was powerful. Now we're training people in the VA in energy therapies. We're training doctors and nurses inside the VA system. We're training people in Cleveland Clinic and Johns Hopkins and Kaiser Permanente.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of openness now in the system, a lot more than there used to be. So even though we have a basically very mechanistic, materialistic society and medical system, there is much more awareness now of the potential of energy to heal. And of course, there's tons of evidence.
I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of the Soul Inspired. Today I have Dawson with us. I'm really excited to dig in and get some information around the work that he does. He works with people who've had things such as PTSD and anxiety. He's a best-selling science writer. He's written best-selling science books, and he has a science background. So this is a first, especially on Soul Inspired, because a lot of the things we talk about here are spiritual in nature. We don't get too science based, but it does come up quite often, especially when we're dealing around trauma, PTSD, anxiety, and mental health related topics. So first of all, thank you so much, Dawson, for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time.
And you're about to discover just how spiritual science can get.
Love it. And honestly, it's funny. I say it like that because I was going to say I'm finding more and more that science and spirituality are kind of coming together. I have conversations with individuals, and sometimes I'll say we're talking about the same thing. We're just using different terminologies. And so I do believe they are coming together a little bit quicker. But I want to first ask you a little bit about yourself. So you clearly you were interested in science. I don't know when this started. Were you into science at a young age, or when was it in your life that you got interested in the topic?
I was interested in high school, and then I wound up getting more and more curious about it as time went on. I studied psychology when I was in my 20s, and I also joined an ashram, a spiritual community, when I was 15 years old. So I was really immersed in the whole world of Aldous Huxley, Alan Watts, Ram Dass, Evelyn Underhill, all
Mm.
the great mystics of the 20th century. And spent my teenage years really focused on how I could extricate myself from my own internal misery by studying the works of happy people and fulfilled people and people who are touching these elevated states. I mean, you read Rumi or you read Saint Teresa, and these people are just wildly, ecstatically happy. And I thought, I want that.
Right. Well, that's
So join a
perfect.
community and then discover that people are just so screwed up in a lot of these spiritual communities. I mean, there's all this stuff going on. Everyone's joined because they're so miserable, and then they often project all their misery into the community and the whole thing. In fact, the one I was in just eventually totally collapsed. So,
Wow. So
an unsuccessful experiment.
you've seen some things. You've seen some things. So you were, and you said, did you say this was around the age of 16 or so?
Yeah, yeah, around 13 or 14, I was having these mystical experiences. Like one day I was laying on my bed in my room and I was just in absolute despair. I was suicidal. I didn't want to be here. I hadn't been wanted to be there for years. And I was just lying there, just in absolute, utter desolation. And I suddenly found myself floating in this luminous, empty, but full space. And I felt as though I was literally one with the infinite, one with the cosmos. And so that experience was powerful. I didn't know how to translate that into anything permanent or ongoing. But after that one experience, I knew there was a there. I knew it was a target to aim at, that we are capable of those kinds of experiences. We human beings can move to those elevated states of what we now call non-duality, and that we, even in the midst of our despair, can access those states. And I then spent the next 50 years trying to get back there again.
Wow, that's fascinating. So that happened in your mid-teens, so around
Yeah.
15 or so. See, so yeah, this is definitely going to go in different directions. Again, and it's my own I don't want to say ignorance or whatnot, but when I hear the word science, right, I I go immediately to um atheism or
Oh, okay.
or I
No, most scientists are led to profound respect for nature, the universe, the cosmos, and the immanent inner intrinsic reality of life. You can't study the cosmos. You can't study the human body without developing a profound sense of how sacred it is and how, in my book Mind to Matter, I mean that book sold over 100,000 copies, and it's like there are so many people who just swear by that book I wrote, and it shows all of the ways in which human consciousness affects the four fundamental forces of physics. So electromagnetism, the weak nuclear force, the strong nuclear force, gravity. There's evidence showing that human consciousness affects every single one of those fundamental forces of physics. And so everything that we experience as this hard surface, this material reality we're dealing with, it all is intertwined with this ground of being, this consciousness out of which it all rises.
Mm. See, I guess where I get a little bit confused around science is there are many people who are in deeply in science who basically state that if something can't be proven, it doesn't exist. And if you can't see or um, I look at, I don't want to name names because I don't want to throw any big scientist under the bus or anything, but there are ones out there that hold the idea that we don't exist beyond this flesh, mainly because they can't prove it. You can't prove it in whatever sense that they've tried to prove it. So as soon as I hear science, I get to this place where I go, well, and I guess my bias just goes in that direction. It's almost like I've been turned off of it growing up, and I've been like, no, I'm more of a spiritual person, whatever that means. And so I get to this place, but then I'll have these discussions. I have really good friends who have these ideas, and they'll say, well, you can't see your soul, so how do you know it exists? And I'll say, well, you're on your phone, and you're accessing the internet, and there's nothing plugged into your phone, but you can access something. So you're using an invisible energy in order to find information for yourself. They go, oh, okay. I guess you're right in that sense. And I love the idea of science because it about being something having to be proven, because it is how we understand things, right? It's how we come to a better understanding of things. So that's why I'm kind of interested to hear, because you're saying that you've worked with people with anxiety and and PTSD and all this, but also that you've worked in regards to around elevated states of consciousness. So here's my question: from your background of all the things that you've done in your life, do you see consciousness as something bigger than who we are from a godly standpoint, or does it have to do with science in some way? Like we hear the simulation theory and we hear God, right? Like, and I don't know if they're the same thing.
Science measures things, science quantifies things. And so when I first was working with people doing energy therapies, and they were doing energy therapies with Vietnam veterans for the most part in the late 1990s, the early 2000s, and they were having these men, because mostly men fought in Vietnam. There were nurses, female doctors, and other women, but there were mostly men. And they were working with these men who had now had a 30 to 40-year history of flashbacks, nightmares, intrusive thoughts, hypervigilance, and they're using energy therapies with them. They were shifting their bodies and their minds through acupressure and through imagery and through belief and through hypnosis and all these things that were affecting their bodies, not materially like a pill or a surgery would, but affecting them energetically. And our energy field is easily measurable. There's all kinds of instrumentation we use in medicine and science to measure it. When we measure our magnetic field with an MRI, the electrical field in our brain with an EEG, you can get a CAT scan or a SPECT scan. So we measure the energies of the body, and as we use energy therapies like acupressure, acupuncture, various other kinds of Reiki, Jorei, all of these energy therapies, they change the mind, they change the body. What science does is it measures the magnitude of change. And so we have people we either are measuring their biology, we're measuring their gene expression, we're measuring their hormone levels, or we're measuring their psychology. We're measuring their levels of anxiety, depression, PTSD, pain, and other adverse kinds of emotions. And what we find when we apply these measuring tools of science to those therapies is they have enormous effects on the body and on the mind. So science is a very useful tool for measuring things that are otherwise immeasurable. If I tell you I've had an energy therapy, I feel better, that's nice. If I show you a randomized controlled trial showing that, and again, I've been involved in a number of randomized controlled trials of PTSD, in 6 1-hour sessions, 90% of those Vietnam veterans who walked into the consulting room 6 sessions earlier, after 6 1-hour sessions, 90% of them no longer have flashbacks, nightmares, intrusive thoughts, and all the other characteristics of clinical PTSD. That's what science does. It measures these things, and then we know that they work.
You mentioned a few things, and that's really fascinating. You mentioned a few things about how energy works, and just a couple things. The channel really, this channel has really taken off in regards to conversations with people who've had near death experiences, past life, experiences and things like that. So, and I remember, I don't know where I read this, but it's been measured that there are individuals who have measured when, and this is kind of morbid, but when there is a body laying down and it's still alive, that the weight of the body slightly changes once they're clinically dead. That there's a small change in their weight, and the question around that is where did that weight come from? Is that we talk about the soul, is that energy, and all these different things. That's the first thing I wanted to mention because that is something that has been measured, as you say, and I would see that as science based. And the other thing is there's been plenty of times in my own personal life when I've been suffering from an ailment, and after numerous attempts at fixing that ailment, whether it's pain, whether it's something that they can't seem to. They say, well, maybe it could be this. It did show a little bit of this on a CAT scan or on whatever. And there was doctors like Dr. Sarno. He works with the mind body. You probably are familiar with him.
Mhm.
And so I've had moments where once I get rid of the idea that this is a physical issue and I go more internal and I speak to it and I look at it like energy, that pain dissipates or goes away. And when those moments have happened, then you think to yourself, okay, I'm going crazy because nothing physically changed. So the real question is, and I'm digging into some deep topics here though. The real question is, we're raised to believe that we are this body, I call it a meat suit. We're walking around, we're born with this suit, and I'm now starting my own, this is just my own feelings, is that there is an energetic body within our body that exists. And whether you want to call that the soul or whatever we call it, there is plenty of my own personal proof that this happens. Now, I don't know if everyone out there listening has happened something like that happen, but is this the same thing we're talking about, or am I talking about something completely different?
It's related, and the physical body arises from the energy body. If you look at Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared, E is where it all starts, energy. And cells have an energy matrix. And for example, the earliest studies in this regard were done by Harold Saxton Burr at Yale University in the 1930s. And he was using salamanders, and salamanders have this amazing ability to regrow a limb. So a limb is severed, the tail is severed, and the salamander literally regrows that entire limb. What he found looking at the energy fields around the salamanders is that when he would look at the energy field of the animal, he would find that even after the limb was missing, the energy field of the limb was still there. And then as the as that limb regenerated, it regenerated along the matrix of the energy field. He also did a lot of work with chickens because they were fairly easy to work with. And he would begin by getting a single cell chicken egg before it grew into a full chick. And he would put it in a tiny little device and find the north and south magnetic poles of the body. Now, we all know that every cell has a north and south pole, just like the Earth does. The top of our head is positive, the bottom of our feet is negative, top of our hands are positive, this part of our hands are negative. Our body has these fields that we measure with an EEG or an MRI. And he would measure these and he'd find the positive pole. And he'd make a tiny little tattoo on the top of that single cell. And then he'd find when the chick hatched where that tattoo was. It was always right up here. So the positive, the chick again is growing along the lines of force of the energy field. And so there is a lot of evidence now showing that our cells actually grow in these energy fields. Even the human fetus, the way genes work, there isn't enough information in our 24,000 genes to actually grow that fetus. There's an energy environment in which the fetus is growing, which is helping nudge gene expression and tell the body, oh, this is a heart cell, this is a neuron, this is a bone cell. So these fields are all around us. We can detect them about 15 feet away from the body pretty easily. We can detect the heart's field, we can detect the brain's field. Every single cell has its own individual field. Together, our cells work collectively. And a lot of the information that they exchange, even just neurons firing, the difference between firing your brain firing in beta, which is roughly 12 to 30 times a second when you're in full awake consciousness, to when you're in deep sleep and your brain is firing at a very slow rate of 0 to 4 cycles a second. Just these cycles per second of energy is determining the activity of the cell. So energy precedes matter rather than following matter. And only the fact that it's invisible gives us the illusion that energy springs from matter. It's the other way around. Matter comes from energy.
Wow. That is fascinating. So now I'm looking at things a little bit different because I never really looked at the fact that the body would have its own energy source. So so that's basically what you're stating is that there is energy that is coming out of like parts of our body. Like that is basically the way we function. I guess where I get so again, I hate to keep bringing it back to this, but this is again because I do so much work around spirituality and the near death experience. When people, a lot of these individuals I speak with, they pass over and they leave their body. A lot of times they'll look down, they'll see this body and not even feel connected any longer. And a lot of times they'll look at it and say, no, thanks. I'm actually putting out an episode soon where a woman she was hit by a car so badly that she was broken, and she's like, I'm not going back in that thing, like I'm done. And she proceeded to have this very spiritual experience and had all these different moments, but then through her own ideas decided to come back and say, well, I'm going to do this. The soul really wanted to come back. I guess the question is the soul, if that exists, whatever that is, and again, I'm just here to listen to the stories and try to portray the messages, right? But if the soul is energy, is that a different energy than what you're speaking of? Like the energy you're speaking of, is it just related to the physiological piece of who we are? So my heart has its own energy, my brain has its own energy, like there's energy protruding from it. Would that be different from the soul, or could they be intertwined?
I don't know the answer to that, and it's just I deal in my books with and in my research with hard science. So we're measuring things like gene expression. Is this gene turned on? Is this gene turned off?
Mhm.
One example of that is an energy healer called Bill Bengston, and is a dear friend of mine, and he's been studied a lot over the last 30 years. And he's an energy healer, and his particular talent is healing cancer. Heals cancer in people, heals cancer in mice. In a lot of the randomized controlled trials done of Bill and his healing method, the typical experimental design is that Bill is either laying his hands on a cage full of mice with cancer, and this is a particular kind of cancer that kills them in about 2 weeks. They don't usually last 3 weeks. So they're dead once they develop this cancer within about 2 weeks. And then Bill puts his hands over the cages, and the mice get better. And he even does it distantly. He can be a long way away, hundreds of miles away. When he focuses on the target of that cage, then those mice get better. And the way this has to do with the bigger energy fields we live in is that, again, there are four fundamental forces of physics, and they're supposed to be completely um, fixed. For example, the weak nuclear force, radioactive decay, plutonium, uranium, francium, americium, all of these things have a known rate of atomic decay that is so accurate and so stable that they make atomic clocks in science because they tell time so precisely, and they don't lose more than a second every 1,000 years. So there's this very, very stable quality to those four fundamental forces of physics. What it happens in these experiments with Bill and healing is that in several of them, he's been doing distant healing on a cage of mice with cancer. And there's a second control cage of mice in a different room in a different building in the university. And at random intervals, he has a little ding on his cell phone, and suddenly he drops what he's doing. And he spends time for about 20 minutes offering healing only to the experimental group in that one room and not to the control group in the other room. And the scientists who do these experiments have magnetometers and other devices below the mouse cages to measure the electromagnetic field in the room, which again should be totally stable. When Bill does that, at those moments, which are random intervals at which a cell phone beeps and he does his healing activity, at those moments, and only at those moments, and at no other moments, the electromagnetic field fluctuates around the mouse's cage around 20% and does it nowhere else on campus or around the other mouse's cage. So here, when healing is happening in this large energy field, it is affecting these four fundamental forces of physics. So those are the kinds of really known things we're able to discover, have hypotheses about, measure in science. And so, when you talk about the soul, we just the language of mysticism and the language between, say, Sufism, Kabbalism, Jainism, Shintoism, it's very, very different. And so trying to get it all to line up is hard. But electromagnetism, gravity, psychological change, anxiety, depression, gene expression, hormones, neurotransmitters, we can measure all this stuff. That's what I love doing. And I
Yeah.
just have people go in there and do healing, and then I measure what's going on in the body. And it's just, there are now thousands of studies showing that consciousness and energy has these profound healing effects on the body.
I hadn't heard of that before, and that's really interesting about the mice. It reminded me of when I was first getting into healing, the idea of healing, because I first got into spiritualism and the near-death experience and all these things. But then in my early 20s, I started really trying to figure out healing. I don't know. I was just always really fascinated by it. And I was seeing a lot of people doing these little experiments and online, and they would do these little videos. And I haven't looked in a long time to see if they still exist, but it was fascinating. It was the rice experiment, the rice experiment. I'm not sure if you are familiar with it, but what some people would do is they would have two jars of rice, and they would have one jar of rice over here and one jar of rice over here. And every morning they would wake up from bed, they'd walk over to one of the jars of rice, this one specific jar of rice, and they would swear at it and be angry and throw all kinds of negative feelings towards this rice. And they would do it every morning. And the experiment was that after 30 days, or even before then, they would show these two jars of rice, and it was white rice, and the rice that they didn't touch was still white. And the rice that they would swear at and throw energy at it was decaying. It was brown, and it was growing fungus, and this has been repeated. People have done this, and they do it, and then they just move on with their lives. we just do it, and we don't think much of it. The average person will do it and be like, well, that's interesting, gonna move on now and live my life and not really think that energy affects me in any way. But clearly it does, because that's just a little experiment you can do at your home, and people have shown this. Now, some people say, oh, it's fake, and I don't think it's fake. There's enough people that have done it at this point that I mean, maybe try it for yourself, for anybody listening, if and you can see if it works. But I find that fascinating. I also find it fascinating Somebody I'd love to get on the show eventually is Anita Morjani. She was a near-death experiencer. She's pretty famous out there for what happened to her because she was in a very late stage of cancer, had a near-death experience, came back and miraculously started healing. And I wonder about those situations because these are moments when they come back and somehow they just go into complete remission. They've learned something about the way their energy works when they're in the afterlife or wherever we are, and they come back and their body heals. So these are all things that I hear and it sticks in me and I go, interesting. Like we really are a beacon of energy. Now, whether the soul is different, I feel like I'm the researcher to be doing that, or people out there that are talking to people about near-death experiences. That's the best science or the best, I would say, proof we can get is when people pass and they have been told, yeah, you died for 12 minutes. And they were like, well, I know, but I felt like I was gone 100 years and I had this experience and came back. And whatever that is might be completely separate from what you're talking about, but it's still energy, right? Whatever it is, we have more than just this this functioning body. And sorry, I'm going to ask you a question now from everything I just said. And you can, if you have anything you want to comment about what I mentioned, you can do that. But I was going to ask you, why do you believe then so much that if you look at the standard medical world, when someone's going through something they need to fix, why do so many doctors focus so heavily just on the body itself to heal or medicine? Or is that something we want to really go down? I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
Well, the short answer there is that we're a materialistic society and patients demand that. But if patients want to do things for self-healing, if they want to use energy techniques themselves, if they want to do self-healing, most doctors I know, and I know a lot of doctors because of my job, they are just delighted when a patient wants to take responsibility for their own well-being and then say use energy therapies and then see the leverage those it can produce. For example, one therapy I teach a lot is called EFT, or emotional freedom techniques, also known as tapping, because you tap on acupuncture points on your body when you're doing it. And we have done many studies that examine physical pain. And the average reduction in physical pain when you tap on your body and regulate your energy field through acupressure is 60%. So here people tap for 10, 15, 20 minutes, and their pain level goes down about 60%. You then, when you go to your doctor, she's going to be really grateful that you've taken responsibility for yourself and done energy therapies, that you've done appropriate diet, that you're exercising, that you're looking at your mindset and beliefs, all of these things. Doctors know it's stress, it's belief, all of these factors play an enormous role. And if you go to your doctor and say, okay, my pain's 10 out of 10, fix me, you are medicalizing the 6 out of 10 that is mindset, belief, energy. And you want to reduce that by those appropriate non-medical means. Then go to your doctor and say, my pain's a 4. Give me an exam. Tell me what's going on here. So it's not, the medical profession is not terribly um, open to change, but patients at our society, our Western society, is highly materialistic in terms of looking for cures. We think of energy as being something, well, maybe I'll do energy healing, I'll go get some Reiki or some EFT after I go and get my prescription. It's the other way around. First, do those things that are really impactful, that are self-care and self-regulation, then bring the rest of it, which may or may not even be there anymore, to your doctor. There's so many people. I'm just going to read you something that somebody on a call. I was on a call with some of our students this last week, and this woman called Ginny said to me, um, my husband had a major stroke 5 years ago. It's been a hard few years, but since we began using your evidence-based meditation track 2 months ago, he's been getting better. He was having lots of gum infections, UTIs, scalp infections. They've all cleared up. He phoned me to tell me he was having a bad day yesterday, and I began getting upset. But then I remembered the meditation, went into those higher realms. I could hear him without reacting. I'm a novelist, and I haven't been able to make any progress on my book for the last 5 years. Then, just after beginning the meditation, everything broke loose. I've written 120 pages and I'm flying. So you want to use
Wow.
energy.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. And that's someone that you've worked with. You worked with, was it her husband that you've worked with?
Oh, she just went on, she just read our stuff online, went on my website, downloaded a free meditation and used it. That was all she did.
Wow. Wow. But that's all, and see, that's all free. Like to them, it's not going and getting all kinds of work done to fix something. I guess where I was trying to go with this, right, was I've heard plenty of times, and I understand it sounds like you've got a good circle of doctors that you know. Just because I've heard many times when people are diagnosed with something very serious, the doctor will say, you know, you have this, you have maybe a year left. And what my worry with that, well, there's a couple things. First of all, I've known plenty of people been told that that's their time is up and they decide, no, it's not. And they get into that energy side of life. So when that happens, I question, are doctors being trained correctly? Are there areas that we can get better at? If we're telling someone they've got maybe this amount of time left, right? Aren't you putting that into their energy? I mean, we're looking up to this doctor and we're looking for an answer, and that's what we're getting. And so, and I guess my point is that yes, there are people out there that will say, no, that's not happening, and they'll decide for themselves. And, but then what about the individuals who are led that way? And so I guess my hope is eventually both worlds come together a little more.
Yeah, I know that I train people in EFT, that acupressure tapping, and in meditation, and they then use that with their clients, and they get lots of referrals from doctors. They not only get lots of referrals from doctors, they get lots of doctors coming to them for emotional and energy work. So doctors are much more open to it now than they used to be. And like when I was going to Washington, D.C. in the early 2000s and really petitioning the Veterans Administration to allow energy therapies into the VA, um, I and my colleagues, we just had the door slammed in our faces. But we just kept on knocking on the door. You know, year after year, we'd go back and knock some more. And then eventually they approved it in 2017. Now we're training people in the VA in energy therapies. We're training doctors and nurses inside the VA system. We're training people in Cleveland Clinic and Johns Hopkins and Kaiser Permanente.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of openness now in the system, a lot more than there used to be. So even though we have a basically very mechanistic, materialistic society and medical system, there is much more awareness now of the potential of energy to heal. And of course, there's tons of evidence. There are over 100 studies of EFT showing it works. There are over 10,000 studies of meditation showing it works for all kinds of different things. I want to just go back to something else you mentioned though earlier, Joe, about near-death experiences, if
Mhm.
I could. If I can just
Sure.
jump the track here
Absolutely.
for a minute.
Absolutely.
So NDEs are interesting, but they're hard to study. You don't know, you can't predict an NDE. The best you can do when someone's had an NDE, you can question them afterwards and find out what their experience was. And there's some fabulous books that do this, that collect these studies and find their common characteristics. What are far more common and much more easy to study are OBEs. And these are out-of-body experiences. And so I'm not going to go in any description or depth into OBEs, other than that there are lots of them. They're easy to study. Almost everyone does have them. But what I teach in our meditation classes is that um, if you look at the model in the Vedas, the ancient scriptures, and I look at the Vedas, I look at the Upanishads, I look at the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, I look at the Bhagavad Gita, I look at the Christian mystics, I look at all these sources of people describing these inner experiences. And what they describe is that we come down as consciousness into a human body. And then the body is born, comes out of the womb. We have a lifespan, maybe 10 years, maybe 70, maybe 80 or 100 years. And then at a certain point, the body wears out, it dies, and then our local consciousness returns to non-local consciousness. And in my book, Mind to Matter, I write a lot about local consciousness, my local awareness at this earth level here. and my non-local consciousness, that which is eternal, that doesn't die. And so all of us, and Aldous Huxley 100 years ago called this the perennial philosophy that underlies all the world's great spiritual traditions, the perennial philosophy, that underneath the changing world that's changing all the time, stars die, galaxies die, cells die, human beings die, but there's something that is unchanging underneath all of that, and that something is consciousness. And the miracle that all of these great scriptures tell us is that we are shards of that consciousness. Rumi said that you are not a drop in the ocean of consciousness. You are the ocean in a
Mm.
drop. And so we are these conscious beings who are here for a while, and then our bodies wear out and we move back, we dissolve, our bodies die, and our local consciousness re-emerges into oneness with non-local consciousness. And the point I want to make here is that when you meditate effectively, and again, all of these great ancient mystical texts tell you how to do that. There's ineffective meditation, there's effective meditation. And when you do it effectively, what you're doing every single day, when you sit there, meditate, and shift, you shift your local consciousness into oneness with non-local consciousness. You lose your sense of being an isolated being here in the body, anchored in a physical form, and you merge with the all that is. And then for you sit there for half an hour, however long you're able to do it, and that you're in the state that the Vedas call samadhi, of oneness consciousness, cosmic consciousness, that you've escaped the bondage of being in a physical body and a physical awareness, and you're one with the all that is. And then meditation comes to an end, and you re-enter the body, and you then calibrate yourself back to being a parent or an employee or an artist or whatever it is you do in the outer world. So you are reenacting the incarnational cycle every day in meditation, just the way that we move from being cosmic consciousness, and then we acquire a body as a baby, have a lifetime, and then drop the body and move back into cosmic consciousness. Every morning in meditation, my experience is very much that I'm dropping the body
Mm.
for that hour. I'm becoming one with the all that is. Out there in oneness and cosmic consciousness, there's infinite bliss, joy, beauty, compassion, kindness, energy with a power and a vibrance that's inescapable in the common way of being. You're just out there in this absolutely remarkable state of what again the Vedas call samadhi, and then after a while you go back into ordinary consciousness. So every meditation is a drop in and a drop out of that incarnational cycle reenacted in miniature every day.
And with meditation, one of the biggest things I get from majority of the individuals I interview is, a question will come in. I'll say, how can, if we can give the audience one thing to do every day, what could it be? Meditation comes up 9 out of 10 times, and it's because these individuals who've had a close call with death see meditation as the closest way to experience what they experience. Now, their experience is pretty dramatic a lot of times. And I look back when I was 15, 16, when you just started getting kind of asking questions in the world, that's when I was asking questions. But I was going through some things in my life, and I don't want to say it went down a dark path, but it got to a point where I didn't know why. I would be looking at my hands. I've said this on plenty of episodes, and I'd say, what is this? And I would have this almost out of body experience, but not out of body. But I was almost like I realized the me or the I was not what the me or the I, what I thought the me or the I was, because I was questioning the actual existence of what this is. And I'm like, well, who's questioning that? And I kept going, I kept, right?
That's the question. Yeah.
Yeah,
Who's out there questioning that?
I
Yeah.
kept kind of going down this rabbit hole of that. And this was when I was 16 years old. And I believe during that time, I was really just trying to prove to myself that we exist beyond this life. The reason why I'm questioning the soul and asking how it's related to energy and the forces of who we are with healing is because I think more than proving life existing is to try to bring the world to a place where we all understand we are more of an energy being than we've been living.
One recent set of studies, I'm describing this in a book that'll be published next year called Spiritual Intelligence. And for whatever reason, when I was writing Mind to Matter a few years back, the main energy healing methods I was talking about were applied to cancer. And there are a lot of cancer case studies in Mind to Matter. In spiritual intelligence, this is really showing up in Alzheimer's research. And people who meditate have very, very different outcomes. In one study, for example, they gave people a meditation technique based on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, highly physical, body-based meditation style that resembles the meditation that I have people do when they download my free meditation. So they had these Alzheimer's patients doing that, and they had them doing that for half an hour a day for 6 months. So, a substantial amount of time, half an hour a day for 6 months. These are people with measurable Alzheimer's. They were on a downward slope of cognitive decline, the buildup of waste in their brains, and they took one group of them and they had them do a placebo control. The other one did the meditation for 6 months. They wanted to see if they would arrest that slope of decline and shrinkage of the brain. The Alzheimer's brain shrinks by about 70% over the course of about 20 years. So between 60 and 80, that Alzheimer's brain is going to shrink by about 70%. The Alzheimer's brain is tiny. It's a little walnut rattling around in a great big skull. I mean, it's just frightening if you look at a post-mortem Alzheimer's brain. So they were hoping it would arrest the shrinkage of these Alzheimer's patients to do meditation compared to a control group. The results came back, and I described the study in chapter 2 of my new book, Spiritual Intelligence. And the researchers found that the meditation, that half-hour meditation that they were doing for 6 months, had not arrested cognitive decline and brain shrinkage. It had reversed it. Their cognitive scores had gotten better. Their brains had grown. And the part of the brain that has to do with executive control had grown. The part of the brain that had to do with memory and learning grew. The part of the brain that had to do with emotion regulation got bigger. So here we are literally reversing Alzheimer's by meditation, by firing and wiring our neurons, by using consciousness, simply using consciousness a different way. Doing this effective meditation is firing and wiring our neural pathways and literally reversing a disease that affects about 56% of Americans. So it is really, when we say energy stuff, meditation, tapping, acupressure, belief, and people think that's woo-woo. Just go talk to Alzheimer's patients, talk to cancer survivors. You'll discover that there are people with remarkable discoveries who've done these things, and there is an absolutely massive amount of research validating the healing value of these techniques.
Now, do you believe that's really amazing? Do you believe that when these meditations are happening, like, is it specific meditations, or is it that they're putting their body and their energy into a place that is more healing just naturally? Like they're not wishing for their Alzheimer's to reverse. You're saying, or are they? I'm just curious about that.
They're doing very specific things. And in my book, Bliss Brain, I bring the lens of neuroscience to all of the hundreds of studies of meditation, but I look at the MRI research. And the MRI research on meditators shows that certain styles of meditation are dramatically more effective than others. And so they were doing things in the Alzheimer's study that were effective. And effective things tend to be body based. You feel it in your body. So you're breathing in a different rhythm. You're relaxing specific muscles. You're shifting your body in certain ways. And so it's those physiological shifts that tend to be the most effective forms of meditation.
And is this the same? So you talked about working with elevated states of consciousness and the fact that you think of something like anxiety. Anxiety affects so many people. I mean, everyone I've grown up with has at one point in their life has had anxiety. And I guess one of the questions I had, because it seems like I don't know want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like you specialize in an area where you're dealing with energy. And are there things that people can be doing to reduce and help their anxieties in life? Is it just simply saying meditate more? Because I think certain people need more specifics.
I set up a science-based form of meditation in 2009 for the purpose of these clinical trials. It's called eco meditation, ECO meditation. Very simple to use, just involves some muscular relaxation, some breathing techniques. And we find that the average drop in anxiety in people going through a course of eco meditation, usually a month, is about 60%. They're dramatically better after only 1 month of eco meditation. Depression drops as well. So anxiety, depression, and PTSD all tend to go down as people are doing eco meditation. Their brains start to change in 30 days of doing eco meditation. The part of the brain that handles self-absorption, and it's a very particular piece of tissue. It's right over here behind your forehead. It's called the mid-prefrontal cortex. In the old days, when after World War II, when patients were given frontal lobotomies, that was the piece of tissue they destroyed, was the mid-prefrontal cortex. And again, it's a source of personhood. It's a source of how you build your sense of self. But it's also the seat of suffering in the brain. People with an active um, mid-prefrontal cortex are depressed and they're anxious. And we found after only 30 days of eco meditation that the mid-prefrontal cortex went quiet. It was much quieter after that. And the part of the brain that was all lit up, that was much more active, was the part of the brain that handles positive emotion, gratitude, awe, compassion, joy, altruism, optimism. That part of the brain was lit up like a Christmas tree. So we can change our brain function in only 30 days. And again, there's tons of evidence showing that this is possible. Now you want to change your mood, you're changing the underlying neural strata of your brain to be resilient and grateful and joyful and compassionate.
It's interesting because one of the things I've said to so many people I've interviewed is that music has always been my meditation. That was kind of the thing I'd always say. I'd say music is my meditation. Anytime I was writing, even as young as 11 years old, I was writing, and I would go to a place where I would start playing the chords on my guitar or the piano. I would just start playing the music, and I would what I call freestyle. I would just start saying all the words to the song, and then the song would end, and so I would record it, and I'd go back and change the words so it would make the sense that I was trying to make it make. But in those moments when I was saying the words, there's plenty of times where I would finish the song and have to step back a moment because I didn't recall why I said them, what it meant, until I really dug in and and could relate to it. And I thought, well, who was that wrote that? I guess it was me, but it doesn't feel like me. And that's the place where I feel like that is the closest I've ever gotten to meditation correctly. And I know it's different than um, sitting meditation quietly in a different place. I think though, this is just my own feeling, is that when you're in a place of bliss in an art or a creative, any kind of creation, it could be just out planting flowers, or it could be painting a picture, or singing, or playing an instrument. There's moments when we can have those moments of bliss. I do believe we're tapping into a form of meditation. It may not be as effective. And I'm just now trying, because I keep being told meditate. And I keep saying, well, music's my meditation, but I do believe there's more to it if I can really dig in. But do you think there's some relation there at all?
Yeah, there's a correlation there. And what you're describing is flow. And there are two paths to those brain states. One of them is meditation, the second one is flow. And the two of them tend to work together. So meditators tend to have more flow in their lives. And then there's a pattern we look for. And I show this on the EEG in all my books. It's called the awakened mind pattern. And so, regardless of whether the meditator is a Qigong master or a Christian faith healer or a Kabbalist or a Buddhist or a Hindu, they will tend to have the awakened mind brainwave pattern in their brain function when they're in a deeply healing and attuned state. We find the awakened mind pattern is also there in people in flow, musicians
Mm.
especially, but artists, scientists, educators, all kinds of professionals, when they're functioning at peak, they're in flow and they also develop that awakened mind pattern. So yeah, you're doing, that's the second path into the awakened mind. One is meditation, the second is flow.
Okay, so musicians are tapping into that area. It's just coming from a different angle. And I do believe that that'll always be my primary source of meditation, but I am going to be working on just peaceful calmness. Because meditation just alone, sitting in silence is probably good, especially with the way the world is anymore. It's good to find those moments. How many books have you written, and where do people find your work?
Well, you can pick them up anywhere on an independent bookstore, on Amazon, online booksellers. And the first big bestseller I had was called The Genie in Your Genes. And it is the studies showing how our intangible functions like beliefs, like thoughts, like energy flow, like consciousness, literally turn genes on and off in our cells. And so it's all the evidence for this. There's a ton of research showing that all of these things are epigenetic. So that was a big, important book. There was another book that I wrote about 15 years later called Mind to Matter, about how our brains and our minds actually synthesize most what we think of as being external objective reality. We're actually building it with our consciousness. And there again, there's enormous amounts of evidence to show that that's true, both inside and outside of our bodies. And there is absolutely no evidence to show that consciousness is an artifact of a complex brain. So consciousness is something that flows through the brain, which the brain tunes to, and then manifests outside the body. And that's mind to matter. Bliss Brain is a deep dive into these ecstatic states of the mystics. How could they be so happy? How could Rumi get so ecstatic? How could St. Catherine be so happy? How did all these great people we admire, and how did they remain poised and have equilibrium and equanimity in the midst of the chaos around them? And so that's a book about the neuropsychology of that. And then spiritual intelligence is about the structures, the physical structures in our brains that predispose us to being able to have this conscious connection with the infinite, with all of consciousness, how our local consciousness connects with infinite consciousness through four particular circuits in our brain. And this phenomenon is called spiritual intelligence. We can develop it.
And they can find that on Amazon anywhere. Can you find it on Kindle? Like you can get it on anywhere.
All of those are available on Amazon, and then spiritual intelligence will be out in about a year.
So spiritual intelligence is the one that you're writing right now.
Yeah.
I'm really fascinated with the mind to matter, because I've always had the fascination of when we talk about the brain and the mind, and the brain and the mind are two completely different things. And what you're saying is that the brain, being the matter, it's this big piece of matter in our heads, uh, is different than the mind, and the mind is our consciousness. Is this the am I saying that correctly? Is it related?
Yeah, the brain is a physical organ, and the brain is a receiver of signals, all kinds of exquisite signals from outside the body. And it's able to download information from the fields of consciousness, and then it's able to project them outside the body as material reality. So the brain is a transceiver, transducer, and has that role. But it does not originate consciousness any more than the analogy used earlier. It doesn't originate this podcast any more than the iPhone in which someone's listening to the podcast originates. I mean, you and I are not in someone's iPhone.
Right,
So
right.
the brain functions the same way. We need a brain. We can't receive the podcast without a brain. You need the brain, but the brain is receiving this information from these vast fields of consciousness. It is then really brilliant at projecting those outside as material reality.
Is that what we would consider the mind then?
Yeah, the mind, the local mind plays that role. And the local mind also can shift. We can, for example, like people are listening right now, watching right now, they could be going and watching a really depressing, violent movie, for example, and driving their cortisol up, making themselves feel depressed and anxious. So where you direct what you do with your mind affects brain, consciousness, and your external reality.
Now I'm fascinated. I probably will get this Mind to Matter book that you've written, because out of the four, that's my biggest. I'm really fascinated by that. But that's amazing. Um, no, thank you so much for going through a lot of this with me. Like I this is the first. You're the first person I've had on the show around energy in regards to it from a scientific perspective. So I appreciate that, because I think the more we talk to individuals, it's the same thing. I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Eben Alexander.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So is I'm the type of person where I'm kind of like straight down the middle. I'm I have a very strong belief system in spirituality and where I'm going, and things like that. But then I also like to be shown. I don't want to say the word proof, but I like to have things measured. I think that was the best way you put it. And when Eben Alexander talks about his experience and how he had meningitis and it attacked his brain was just completely filled with it. And this is a surgeon, this is a doctor who's very science driven, very science based, has an actual experience that caught him off guard, and showed him an existence that he wasn't aware of. Um, those type of stories fascinate me even more. Not that no one else's, it's not that everyone else's stories and experiences don't hit me, but it's because of the work that he's done. I mean, he literally worked with the brain, and he had the scientific understanding of the way the brain, the meat of the brain, like the actual organ, works. And here he is without a functioning brain, and still existing somehow. And just that story, I'd love to have him on sometime, because I think he would blow my mind with his ideas of how things work too. But that's why I'm saying I'm down the middle. I really like to take the measurable stuff, and then the belief, and bring them together. That's the way I work. I don't tend to go one way or the other, and this is why I like having different types of people on the podcast. So you are interesting because we're talking about energy and something that we can't physically see, yet you're measuring it scientifically, and
And measuring the effects of it. They're easy to measure the
effects.
effects of it. You can't always measure the energy directly. You can sometimes, other times you measure the effects in terms of healing, either psychologically or physically.
Right. And the effects, right, the effect. So because you're measuring the effects of it, that is a way to show if something exists.
Yeah, change the energy, what changes in terms of what you can measure as its effects. So, for example, when we use energy therapies and we're, say, looking at people's level of anxiety, how does that change? How does their pain change? We've even done studies showing how their gene expression changes. We've shown that when people use EFT, for example, we've done this with veterans now, and we show that they literally have changes in the way their genes express. Genes are being dialed up and down based on energy. So it's having very direct effects on the body. Those are measurable.
So it's outside in.
Yes, consciousness, and then all our bodies, our cells, matter is downstream of energy.
That is fascinating, because I believe I've been thinking it was the other way, that that our I do believe our actions can affect our energy, or maybe it's outward too, but maybe it's both ways. I'm not sure, but I'm just thinking. My mind is just it's it's going and going here, but that's really interesting. So the energy that's around you, and this makes complete sense. It's the same idea. I mean, this all relates to so many things that they talk about when they talk about the power of manifestation, and bringing, success, wealth, and happiness in your life. To be careful about the people that, they say that, watch the five people who are around you most of the time, because that can affect you. Well, that's the energy. There's energy. And does that energy affect us? Well, of course it does. So these are all things that I believe we're kind of just going about our days and not thinking about. So I encourage the audience out there to look at the energy around you, to, work on yourself, to
Meditate, meditate, meditate,
meditate,
meditate.
incorporate meditation. I think I think if I could just keep putting that out there that we all need to meditate, and I need to get on that too. Maybe I'll start a meditation group and do a challenge and see if we can all do it for 30 days or something. But oh, this has been amazing. I do want to just leave you with one final question. I ask everybody and anybody that I've had on my episodes, what do you believe deep down, right from your soul, right from your feeling, is the main purpose as to why we are here?
Very simple. We are here to awaken to the fact that we are consciousness, and our local awareness, our local consciousness, our local mind is here to awaken to the fact that we are one with the all it is. We are one with the entire field of consciousness. When we do that, that's what awakening is. And we aren't the spiritual path, enlightenment, awakening, it's not getting anywhere. It's simply noticing what you already are. The Buddha said, "You are already the Buddha. You are already this." The Upanishads say, "Thou art that." Meister Eckhart said the same thing. The Christian mystics all say the same thing. You are inherently as Rumi put it, you are the ocean in a drop. Most people, though, simply go about their lives in total ignorance of that, have very little curiosity, and waste the opportunity of a lifetime. And so awakening is awakening to the fact that you are this remarkable fusion of local human consciousness with infinite consciousness. When you meditate, you dissolve that local human anchoring and you become one with the all it is. You just float in these fields of bliss and compassion and joy. And then you get to come back and you get to talk to people, you get to be kind to people, you get to do things to express that. And so the reason we're here is simply to become aware of the fact of who we already are, who we inherently are, which is consciousness itself.
Wow, I have a bonus question for you, if that's okay.
I earned a bonus.
Because that just
Too
opened up
funny.
a yeah, that just opened up a whole different direction or a path that I could go down. But I was going to ask you because you are someone who has practiced meditation, and it seems like you continue to practice meditation. And the soul inspired is really around experiences. It's around experiences that people have had. And I think the reason why experiences are so powerful, it's the same thing when you look at science. If something can be proven, some people like to hear stories. It's same with somebody who's healing from an ailment. They love to hear success stories. It's the way that I think we are built innately is to get some to hear somebody's experience and to build off of that and to see what's possible. So my question to you is, if you've been on this meditation journey, have you yourself had moments that you felt you were not present here in regards to you yourself being here, but you had moved into a different dimensional feeling, or it felt something different from your own personal being? I didn't know if you wanted to share any experiences like that.
Oh yeah, mystics talk about this. I have just spent some time in the last few weeks with several mystic friends, and it's like if you've taken a trip to Italy and you meet someone else who's been to Italy as well. You get together, you just chat about Italy. When you meet other mystics, you sit around and chat about where you've all been, and we've all been to the same place. Some of them are Jewish, some of them are Sufi, some of them are Christian, some of them are Buddhist, but we've all been to the same place. And that place is what's called in mysticism is the void, is the all it is the infinite, and it's simply where I found myself when I was a teenager. That infinite space of presence, of consciousness, of being. There, it doesn't have structure and form the way we know it, and many mystics call it the void as a result. So we find that the term the void cropping up in Christian mysticism, in Buddhism and Hinduism. But yeah, we just go there. And so most of us just, like I have a date tomorrow morning, for example, with a friend of mine. We just go there once a week together every Friday morning. And we just hang out there in the void for a while, then come back, and I go back into the office and start to do research and writing and interacting with members of my team and doing all the usual things at work. But for a while, we've all gone and we've come together in this space of simply pure being, and it's really where
Yeah.
the place from which you live the rest of your life.
Are you saying then that you can go into this place and you can recognize the energy from another being that is in the same place at the same time?
You don't find other people there as distinct, individualized entities or energies. It's more like everything you think of as you as an entity dissolves, and you're simply in this infinite space. There are no objects, no people, no identities there. You're simply there in this infinite space. And so you just go
Hmm.
there every day. It's just part of what you do with your life. Maybe you have a meditation retreat, you'll go there for a week on end. The Yoga Sutra is called the Samadhi, entering a place of Samadhi. You go to Samadhi where you're in the void. And so there's no sense of identity there.
Hmm.
It's not like
Hmm.
you're meeting up with, Jesus, Moses, the angels. You're just it's a place of pure being that is undifferentiated.
That does come up during NDE experiences quite often. And they have this place of nothingness and they say it was amazing. It was the best feeling I've ever had. I was in nothing.
Yeah,
And I go, that doesn't sound like a good day. What do you mean? Because I'm associating nothing with our version of nothing.
yeah.
And then I learned that no, it nothing is also everything. So it's a state of nothing and everything at once, and yet they'll have that experience, but then they will have almost a more individual soul experience with, different beings or loved ones that have passed or anything. So then I really think to myself, wow, there's really a lot going on more than we know. And if there's different dimensional places we can be in, it just, I think it gets to a point where it's the same sense of some people come have these experiences, come back, and they have difficulty explaining the experience. Not everyone, but there are times where they can't use our terminology to explain the places they've been. They do their best, but like I just said, nothingness to me felt scary, and yet they're telling me it was a beautiful experience. So the void, again, you hear the word void, and you think, oh, it's a void, but it's not necessarily a scary thing. Is that correct?
Yeah, so some people do get scared of it, and so the great teachers say that if you go there without preparation, without a guide, like for example, I was at Omega Institute where I teach every year last year, and we teach a course, online course called The Short Path to Oneness, where we pair people up with a mentor for a year, and we take them way out there. We help them experience the void and move into the void, and then get fairly familiar with getting there, where they can get there very quickly at each meditation, and then come back. But you need a mentor, you need a guide to help you get there usually, because you start to have a lot of anomalous experiences. And the young man we met at Omega Institute, actually in his early 40s, 20 years before, he touched the void in meditation. He was going to the void in his early 20s, and it was so disturbing to him and to his meditation teacher that he just his meditation teacher said, "Don't go there," and he never did, and he didn't go there for 20 years. And so you do need to read about it. You need to read the works of the mystics, get a mentor if you possibly find somebody to help you be there. There are a lot of stories and there are a lot of accounts by people who had these awakening experiences without that structure of support, and it can lead to a lot of um, disruption when you start to be able, one guy was talking about, suddenly I can see what other people are thinking. I'm in a room, I know exactly what everyone's thinking. Another guy said, I now know what's going to happen in the future. I can predict the future, and I have the gift of precognition. Another person developed clairvoyance. Another person developed clairsentience. So people start to develop all of these extraordinary abilities when they're moving into these mystical states. And that's why you need an anchor, you need a tradition, you need somebody to mentor you through them. Otherwise, it can be very difficult to integrate them. People who tend to have these experiences without that often think that they're crazy, or that they can't get themselves back. In our Short Path to Oneness course, over the course of that year, we take people out there, but the whole last third of it is getting them back, because they need to come back and integrate that with being a father, a mother, a an employer, an entrepreneur, having a regular job, whatever it is they do. You can't just go out there and, the void is blissful beyond imagining. But
Mhm.
if you just go out there and get stuck out there, then you aren't able to really bring that into a meaningful life here at the local level. So you want the blessings of both. You want to be able to go out there to the void and come back and have a wonderful life here as well.
So it's good to have a teacher or mentor, someone who has been used to going down that way, especially if that's brand new to you, right? I completely can understand. And I think a lot of people have a fear around it, and this is why a lot of people stay away from it. But as we said earlier, simple meditation is probably a good place to start. And if if you get too deep into it, I did have one moment I've always talked about where I was in this deep meditation when I was experimenting with it, and I all of a sudden was aware that I was meditating. And I was almost as if I was behind myself, just the awareness of being behind myself. And I remember thinking, oh, look at, I'm meditating. And it was very simple. It wasn't a lot of emotion. It was just an
Yeah.
awareness of it. Well, what then happened is once the I, or I don't know which part of me, realized that I was aware I was meditating, I had a panic and I immediately found myself back and my heart was racing and I woke out of the meditation. And I don't know if that was just because I wasn't prepared for that moment. I had just kind of got into some meditation and I didn't know how to handle that moment because I felt great at first, but I don't know if the conscious mind kicked back in and said this is different than your what you're used to, and I had a reaction. What do you think about that? I've never asked anyone, but curious what you think.
It gets much more intense to the point where your personality structures start to collapse. And so things that you have thought of yourself as being, I am this, I do this is my identity. After a while, those parts of self simply, there's just so little energy running through them that they start to collapse. Those neural bundles in your brain start to disintegrate. And so you start to have trouble even knowing who you are. And so there are really well established ways in the great traditions, great spiritual teachings about how to handle that. But it can be very disturbing sometimes. Like there's one phase of this where your emotion changes from being really intensely joyful to being very neutral for a few weeks or months. And there are neurological changes happening in the brain. It's really puzzling to have been an extremely emotional person, to be really a passionate person, and
Mm.
suddenly all emotion goes away for a while your brain restructures. So yeah, there are all
Wow.
kinds of personality shifts that start to happen when you start stepping out. That was what the Buddhists call the witness perspective. You were in the witness perspective, witnessing, looking down at your body, at yourself, and that's a very powerful perspective. And you need to be able to enter the witness perspective and then move back into integrating that with your everyday life. So
Wow.
these are, these are this is why we came to Earth to learn all this stuff. But
Hmm.
these are big shifts, big lessons.
I can see how, a constant reflection of meditating constantly could have an impact on the ego. So I can understand. Like, I think we're talking about the ego changing a little bit and being aware of, like, I haven't heard anyone say about the emotional changes you can have. So, but it is something that I think brings us to a different place. And this has been absolutely fascinating. Is there a website people can contact you? Or what's the easiest way to contact you?
It's so funny, Joe. We've touched on so many things here. We've only scratched the surface of all of them, but there's a
I
lot more
know.
there. Yeah. So what I want people to do this. Go to the website Dawson, my name, just Dawson, Dawson Gift GIFT.com. Download the energy acupressure tapping mini manual. That's this really fast stress reduction technique based on acupressure. And there's also a free meditation there. Those things are both free. And then once you're there, you can find our online courses, you can find my books. We have hundreds of certified practitioners who are expert at trauma, expert in meditation shifts, and can help you with these kinds of inquiries. And there's a ton of help there. I really recommend working on the trauma piece first. Don't try and go to the mountaintop before you've got yourself out of the mud. You want to deal with
Mm.
the trauma part first, and those practitioners are really good at that, then you start to move into elevated states. So through dawsongift.com, you'll find the practitioners, you'll find the online courses, you'll find all the live courses. We teach all over the world. We have people who are doing trainings, and there's a whole ecosystem of resources through dawsongift.com. The first thing to do is download the manual and grab the meditation.
Thank you so much. I constantly feel blessed when I have people on that open up my. I'm being honest. I started this podcast with the intention of just bringing awareness of inspiring stories, try to help people in this world. But it's opened up my mind. Am I saying that right? It's opened up my awareness of things much quicker, almost to a point where I sometimes have to go away from the episode and really contemplate what I've seen. So I encourage anybody that has been watching this, go back and watch it again because you really have brought a lot of insight to the conversation. I do feel like you're someone I could sit and talk to for about 10 hours straight. And I want to also say to everybody, please continue to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone if you feel it would be helpful. And I want to thank you so much, Dawson, for being on today. I appreciate you so much.
Joe, what a joy. It's a pleasure to share.